also collected few. I have collected few reading material. I will send it to you after the webinar is over.
Okay,
That would
sir.
be good,
You
sir.
can
That would be
distribute
good.
among the students.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So, should I start the?
Yeah, please start, please.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Good evening, all. On the behalf of Department of Political Science, Vasanta College for Women, Rajghat, and DAV PG College, I welcome you all to the day 4 of this 5 days online workshop on conflict resolution and peace research issues and methods. As the day are progressing, the sessions are becoming more interesting. It was so pleasant and worthwhile to hear from some of the incredible speakers such as Professor Priyankar Upadhyay sir, Kaushiki madam, Anju Sharan ma'am, and yesterday we all heard Dr. Vibhud Raut Rai sir. If we will talk about today's theme, there are several dimensions of conflict resolution and peace, in which environmental security is one of the major dimensions of it. Environmental security is a security term which arose from the expansion of narrowly defined concept of security and in here we can see that discussion started since 1980s. In the continuation, we are going to have an enthralling session with a very experienced and adept personality and stalwart in this area of expertise. I'm really fortunate that he is also my teacher and mentor. I welcome to our chief speaker for today's session, a dynamic orator and true educator, Professor Manoj Mishra, sir. But before that, I would like to introduce sir. Sir is the coordinator of Malviya Center for Peace Research, BHU, holds a consistent first-class university record with MA, MPhil, PhD in the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His PhD was on ethnic minorities in Central Asia. Currently, Professor Mishra is concentrating on the issues of human security, peace research, environmental security, and environmental conflict. He was awarded UPSAM Fellowship at the United Nations mandated University for Peace, Costa Rica. There he developed two exhaustive curriculums on peace, conflict, security, and development. And the other was on environmental security and peace building. He has obtained an international diploma in peace research from the University of Oslo, Norway in the year 2012. The award was granted by Peace Research Institute, Oslo, that is PRIO. He has published books and over a dozen research papers in the peer-reviewed national and international journals. His research interests are international politics, ethnic minorities studies, conflict management and peace research, human security concerns, environmental conflict and environmental security. And he will be going to speak about the environmental security and peace North-South divide. So now, without taking much time, I would like to invite you, sir. Sir.
Thank you, Punita. Thank you, everybody. Today I have divided my lecture into three parts. The first part I will be discussing what is environmental security, and the second part will be a bit of peace building activities in the gamut of environmental security concerns. And the third part will be the global environmental politics of climate change, the North-South divide. So these are the three major portions of my lecture today. So before starting the first part, that is environmental security. So the whole idea of this problem, that how the environment has become a security threat for the human beings, is basically a concern which arose in the late 70s and early 80s. So the first question is, what is wrong with the environment? The environment, which is supposed to be a part of human life-giving experience, has become a security threat to the human beings itself. So in the post-Cold War era, redefining security has become something of a cottage industry. So after this Cold War ended, so the environmental security has become a new security threat. More interestingly, arguments whether environment should be seen as a security issue ranges from the belief that the securitization of the environment is the most important step for the survival of the human beings. And those who are cynically attempt to grab the government decisions and spending from that, we see there is a difference between the traditional security and the environmental security. So the traditional security is that you become secure by having tanks, an army, warplanes, and nuclear weapons. But the environmental security is basically something different. Here, as we would go and find out in a later part of our lecture, that the environment is doesn't pose a security threat per se for us. It is an indirect way to find out how the environment has become a security threat to the human beings. So Mayers calls it an ultimate security. And there are others like Dunde who say that environment security is the pollution of security. So the entire discourse between environmental security ranges from ultimate security to the pollution of security. So the environment security has been achieved attention for over a decade now, for 2, 3 decades. And the concept of environmental security approaches ranges from the specific linkages between environmental change and deadly conflicts, and the possible role of environmental conservation, cooperation, and ultimately peace building. So, what is the definition of definition of environmental security? So, Barry Buzan, in his classic work, which he talks about for the first time, that the maintenance of the local and planetary biosphere as the essential support system to which all other human enterprises depend. You see, he talks about that whether the human existence itself can be a threat, and this threat has come from the environment. So, thus defined, it clearly falls under the scope of security issues. So, I will be talking about, can the environment be securitized? This is one of the biggest challenges in the present world. So can you securitize the environment? So, the challenges or the threats which are coming from the environment, can human beings be securitized from it? So, that environment emerges as a broad security agenda. So, this is basically we are broadening the security agenda, which was earlier very narrow in nature. Earlier, it was tanks, armies, bombs, nuclear weapons, and this traditional concept of security. And environment comes under the non-traditional concept of security. Right? So this is basically to widen the scope of security itself. So when we talk about environmental security, what does the threat come from? Desertification is the key part of national defense efforts to contain the reserve, the advance in Sahara. So why desertification is taking place in some of the sub-Saharan regions is because of the environmental change which is happening, and that is creating a security threat. And that is the reason why some countries and some between countries there is a fight or there is a conflict going on, and indirectly we have to actually link this, that whether the fight which is happening is because of the environment. That is the challenge. So which conflict is basically based because of the environment and which conflict is not, has to be understood from this point of view. Now let's come to, I will clarify this, the human versus the natural environment, the never ending debate. So basically, there are two possible kinds of environmental security threats. First, those emanating from the natural environment, like earthquakes, cyclones. These are something which is happening naturally. And seconds are those the result of the human agency impacting the natural environment, such as greenhouse gas emissions, resulting from climate change. So this climate change is anthropogenic. It means that human activity which is taking place is the result of global warming and climate change. And this global warming and climate change is creating a degradation of the environment, and for which some of the conflicts which are actually happening is because of this degradation. And it is anthropogenic, means it is because of the human activity which the human beings are doing on the planet Earth. And that is the outcome of this conflict. So there seems to be a consensus that the latter category, that is the anthropogenic or the human activity, is a proper concern of environment security threat. So these threats results from the process of civilization and evolved a manipulation of nature that has reached self-defeating proportions, and massive population increase, enormous economic activity in the last century. So Barry Buzan and others, basically in their book State, Security and Fear, that environmental debate is really preserving the existing level of human civilization. So the real concern is whether or not the ecosystem needs to preserve and further develop human civilization are sustainable. So the environmental security is not just about human struggle with the nature as such, but the problem coping with the dynamics of the post-industrial cultures. So in the post-industrial and in the post-globalization culture, which we are finding ourselves, we have to place this environmental security threat in this context. So the primary problem is basically human activity. These are the result of deliberate acts caused by unintended side effects on the pursuit of our objectives. It is not about dealing with natural disasters such as earthquakes or hurricanes or cyclones, but not also human struggle and unpredictable efforts, but environmental threats, as Professor Pernis has suggested, are threats without enemies. So environment as such, we cannot see the environment as an enemy, but is basically a threat without the enemy. That is what is happening. So now let's come to the other part of the environmental security agenda. So what can be included in the environmental security agenda? So there are actually four important things that can be included in it. First is environmental security concerns include disruption of the ecosystem, such as climate change, loss of biodiversity, desertification, deforestation, depletion of ozone layer, and the various frames of pollution. These factors the natural environmental balance if local to global ecologies are being damaged by the activities of human population. So this is the first agenda. The second concern is about energy. It is related to the depletion of the natural resources, different kinds of pollution involved in the storage and transportation of chemicals, oils, nuclear material, and the problem of energy scarcity and uneven distribution. That is another aspect of energy security, the environmental security agenda. The third category is that the environmental security agenda affects the human population growth, which includes major population movements, basically the kind of migration which is happening. You see, there are more than 4 million Ukrainians now who have, this is because of a war, which have migrated to European countries. And what is going to be the impact on the environment with the migration, that has to be seen as a security agenda. And lastly, food securities, uneven distribution of food, including famines and loss of fertile soil, water, resources, and many parts of the world. So these are the four different agendas which we are looking at the energy at the environment security agenda. So now let's come to another important definition that the basic logic of environment security is that globally human beings are living beyond the carrying capacity of the planet. You see, the carrying capacity of the planet means suppose in your kitchen you have a sink, and the sink can carry a particular amount of utensils and water. If you overload it, it starts overflowing. So just like that, the earth has a carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is defined as the total patterns of consumption that the earth's natural system can support without undergoing degradation. Carrying capacity is influenced by the numbers, technology, and lifestyle. The highly developed countries of the West, their advanced consumer lifestyle, make greater demands upon the planet resources that the lifestyles of the developing countries are. The world's poorer countries are not only most to blame for global environmental problems, but their lifestyle is far less demanding on the global resources. But that is basically the consequence. I will be dealing with it when I talk about the North-South debate. This leads to one of the major implications, that identifying that what is the security threat that is evolving from this thing. In the Cold War discourse, the provider of security was clearly the state, and the instrumental provider was the armed forces. But the damage to the environment per se becomes a part of the security problematic. It remains partly and crucially a responsibility of the state to maximize security in this area. And yet it also becomes possible that scientists, even common people, to take their important responsibility in enhancing the environmental security from society as a whole. Next, the most important part is, can the environment be securitized? The threat which is arising from the environment can you defend it or securitize it for the human beings? So that is the agenda, main agenda. So there are various efforts to include environmental issues on the security agenda by a number of scholars. Peter Gellick has linked the environment to a number of other actors, including military and societal sectors, while security thinkers embrace problems of pollution, population growth, transnational pollution, widespread poverty, and inequality in the social systems. These scholars are against the securitization of the environment of the view that to amorphous a concept to be theorized. So there are two views in this. Can the environment be securitized or whether it cannot be securitized? So Mark Levy argues that the environment can refer to anything in which something takes place or affects the people, in other words, almost everything at all. Therefore, argues that the term should be reserved for those that involve ecological feedback and equilibria are a critical substance of human life itself. So there are others who actually criticize the concept of environmental security threats because how much you can go on securitizing. So suppose you say that there is a road accident, can you securitize the road accidents? Can you securitize other kind of things which on which people die? So it is very dangerous to say that securitize the environment, but of late there has been some debate going on, and the debate is that the environment should be securitized and the government should spend the budget and the money in order to securitize the environment so that the people are less affected in the whole process. So now I will go and clarify this more in a different way by approaching environmental security threats from different schools of thought. There seems to be a problem in securitizing the environment as it remains a controversial from many quarters. The traditional military analysts have largely ignored the idea as security still remains basically a realist concept. Thus, this leads to different that the environment can and should be securitized. So, the first school of thought that the environment should be securitized was first started by Thomas Homer Dixon, who belonged to the Toronto School. So, the first groups this group simply focused on the natural resources as a potential cause of future interstate conflict and war. The Toronto School, headed by Thomas Homer Dixon, associated that Thomas Homer Dixon has sought empirical evidence for some kind of environmental security approach. Actually, in the early 90s, 93, 94, Thomas Homer Dixon did a lot of empirical fieldwork research in sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Pakistan, Algeria, and then found out that some of the conflicts which are taking place in these areas and the reasons of the conflicts are environmental in nature. And he, with the huge amount of data and fieldwork, tried to link that the conflict is happening because of the environment. It's the same thing what I earlier told that it is basically a war without enemies. It is indirectly the environment is actually creating the conflict in an indirect way. That link has to be understood and found out. So the Toronto School puts emphasis on the link between renewable resource scarcity and violent conflicts. It concentrates upon the issues that scarcities of forest, fish stock, water, cropland, and the concept of environmental security is defined by the Toronto School in three different ways. It is the first is that the supply induced security caused by degradation and depletion of the environmental resources, for example, erosion and desertification. The second is the demand induced scarcity, results in the population growth with the region or the increased per capita consumption of resources, either of which heightens the demand for a resource. And the third is the structural scarcity, which arises from the unequal social distribution of the resource that concentrates in the hands of relatively few people, while the remaining population suffers and serious shortages happen, and that creates the conflict. And that is where the problem starts. So what is interesting in the Toronto School is that environmental scarcity contributes to violence in developing countries, mostly. The Toronto School tried to draw a wide range of case studies that are under the circumstances, scarcities of renewable resources, and that results in conflict. They further argue that the environmental security contributes directly to the interstate conflict In 1969, the El Salvador and war in Honduras, described by Thomas Homer Dixon, is the first classic example of ecological driven conflict. That is what he found out in his research. So now let's come to the Toronto school, to the second school of thought, is basically the Swiss Peace Foundation Environment and Conflict Project, ENCOP. Environmental conflicts are defined as a project of traditional conflicts that are induced or sparked by environmental degradation. And that is what Lebensky and others also subscribe to this view. Maldevelopment associated with increase in poverty and inequality, natural resources, overexploitation, environmental degradation, and environmental discrimination uh, results in conflict in some of the areas. So NCOP identifies the contexts that were susceptible to environmental following drylands, mountain areas, and lowland versus the highland interactions, transboundary river basins, areas of degradation of dams, tropical forest, and sprawling metropolises. So NCROP research linked these susceptible contexts to the triggering of factors of maldevelopment and environmental discrimination to generate several major factors, types of conflict in which environmental stress plays a role. It is not necessary that the primary or the predominant one, but ethnopolitical conflicts, demographic caused migrations, international water conflicts, and global environmental conflicts such as overall depression and global warming. All these things are because of the result of conflict, and these are all environmental driven. So the third school of thought in the environmental conflict and security is by Paul Collier and Honefer. These are the two World Bank economists from the Oxford University Research Project. And they argued that natural resources abundance and rather than scarcity is the critical for civil war. So they said that wherever there is abundance of resources, there is conflict. And where there is scarcity, there is no conflict. They proposed holding a level of grievances constant and more rebellious, like likely in countries with abundance of natural resources. As you see in the case of Congo and Liberia and many of the African countries, and also in the Southeast Asian countries, timber like wood in Malaysia and Indonesia, and most of the conflicts in Philippines and Latin American countries are because of the abundance of resources. The abundance of resources is one of the main causes of conflict. These natural resources are often an aimed and sometimes primary goal of emergent movements. Looking at the natural resources is hypothesized from the point of view that military and then the whole concept of armed rebellion and warlords and all these kind of things which happened in the 90s until 2000 and till present times were some of the reasons for environmental conflicts. So in conclusion, which emerges from the above debate, within different schools of thought, that environmental domain lends itself to the post-realist approach to security because, as Jessica Matthews has put it in 1990, many of the key issues are regional or even global in scope and cannot be neatly confined to sovereign territorial boundaries. So, the traditional realist approach to international relations distorts misunderstanding or ignoring them. So, basically, they are talking about the post realist approach, and environmental conflict is part of the post realist approach. This is basically my first part of the lecture ends here, and it talks about what is environmental security and what is environmental conflict and how some of the conflicts of the world which are environmental in nature. Now let's come to my second part is environmental peace building, broadening the environment security program. So if there are conflicts, there has to be peace building. So environmental peace building is a new term which was conceived in the late 90s and 2000, and uh, according to this theory, initiatives such as transboundary cooperation for environmental conservation, peace parks, international river basin arrangements, regional marine agreements, and joint environmental monitoring program would enhance cooperation between communities and countries to bring about environmental peace building. scholars have increasingly focused their attention uh, 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 to the conflict resolution and collaborative behavior towards long-term peace. It is possible by identifying the condition under which environmental cooperation best facilitates conflict transformation and peace building, and which forms the negotiation or the stakeholder participation has been particularly successful. So now let's come to the approaches to environmental peace building. So most ecological peace initiatives fall into the three categories. So these were given by CONCAC census, the Cyrus and Debelco and Debelco itself. These are the four political scientists or environmental peace negotiators. So they have given these three initiatives. The initiative to prevent conflicts that are directly related to the environment, first, efforts to initiate and to sustain a dialogue on transboundary environmental cooperation between parties to the conflict, and thirdly, initiatives that seeks to lasting peace by promoting conditions for sustainable development. So now let's discuss these three aspects in different forms. So environmental cooperation should play the role of preventing violence that erupts due to uncontrolled exploitation of natural resources, destruction of the ecosystem, and the devastation of livelihoods based on natural resources. Most of the research that establish the link between environmental degradation and violent conflict focus on two solutions: reducing on the resources on which people are economically dependent and strengthening institutional capacities to respond to environmental challenges. So environmental cooperation should help the victims of the environmental injustice and already socially and economically disadvantaged people. Latent environmental problems may combine the material insecurity and preserve marginalization and create explosive situations, especially where ethnic identity undermines the access of political and economic opportunities. So some of the environmental peace building aspects which has taken place in the world, there are a lot of case studies to it also. So active environmental cooperation should help alleviate the important resource of peace building in the long term. So now let's come to using environmental cooperation as a platform for dialogue. So the second aspect approach to environmental peace building seeks to address the conflict that have no specific environmental causes. These initiatives attempt to create peace by bringing conflicting parties to each other and solution to common environmental challenges. Countries are found to have environmental issues that are one a few topics. I will take some of the case studies and now try to analyze it from the point of view that how dialogue can bring about environmental peace building. So in the Caucasus region of Armenia and Azerbaijan, the dispute over Nagorno-Karabakh, so that was for the first time a dialogue was initiated and peace was brought about in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. In the fall of 2000, the government of Georgia convinced Armenia and Azerbaijan to set up trilateral biosphere reserves in the southern Caucasian region. Although Armenia and Azerbaijan did not yet were ready to cooperate directly with each other, the agreement calls for them to create national biosphere reserves, which will ultimately be integrated into a single conservation area. A similar attempt was trying to be made in Kashmir over the India-Kashmir when fighting under the British rule. But some international environments have proposed establishing a peace park in the Karakoram and in the Siachen region. So Siachen should be converted into a peace park so that it can be used for tourism purpose and both India and Pakistan can earn revenues from the peace park. That is a suggestion in the dialogue process, environmental cooperation and dialogue process. So the third aspect is promoting sustainable development to achieve durable peace. The third approach is based on the premise for long-term and comprehensive sustainability is a prerequisite for lasting peace. The joint management is shared resources can not only wait to keep both parties talking, but also to key to negotiating a resolution. For example, even if water scarcity is not the cause of conflict between Israeli and Philistine, a solution to the shared water problem as a necessary for peaceful resolution. So making environmental peacemaking a reality, then environmental peacemaking initiatives should also reduce the tension and the violent conflicts between countries and can bring about tangible environmental, economic, and political gains. Environmental peace making strategy often are the chance to craft a positive, practical policy, a framework for cooperation that can emerge on a broad community and stakeholders combating environment development and peace related concerns. So, the challenge before the international community today is to gather evidence, however partial and indirect may be, that more aggressive environmental peacemaking strategies should be create opportunities. This might also be make the governments, the intergovernment organizations, social movements, and NGOs and other activists and other actors to be more aggressive about environmental cooperation and peace building. A novel way of environmental peace building in the 21st century is globalization. Although its effects are complex and by no means entirely healthy for the ecological sustainability, but globalization has the ability to move political dynamics out of a narrow interstate setting into a broader society to society context in a more important and healthy side. This new social space holds much of the potential for environmental peacekeeping. It is well worth finding out whether these changes can create opportunities on building peace, lessen environmental insecurity, and break the zero sum logic that often plagues international relations. So, this is the second part of my lecture. So, where I talked about basically the importance of environmental peace building and cooperation. So, when a conflict or a security threat happens, so that has to be resolved not by war or not by any armed battle, but by cooperation, dialogue, and environmental conflict resolution. So this is basically the approach to which to look at environmental problems. Now let me come to the last part of my lecture. That is global environmental politics, climate change, the North-South divide. So basically, in the last 2 decades, especially post uh, Cold War era and the era of globalization, uh, there seems to have been an environmental degradation to climate change has become a global concern. The new debate has come to the prominence regarding settling standards for environmental protection between developed and developing countries, and also to identify the prime culprit of environmental degradation. So you see, the hyper globalization was one of the reasons for environmental degradation globally, especially China, India, and the other developing countries. Because America and European and other developed countries in the post globalized in the post Cold War and in the globalized era, they outsourced everything, especially the manufacturing sector, to China and India and to the Southeast Asia and South Asia and Latin American countries. So the debate between the North and the South and the politics of North and South has to be understood in this context. The debate between the developed and the developing countries to identify, limit, and minimize the ever increasing threat of global climate change is often known as the North South debate in global environmental politics. Human activities such as industrialization, consumerism, burning of fossil fuel, tropical deforestation, and the ever increasing use of automobiles and more strongly connected with the environmental degradation as contributing to production of greenhouse gases, which in turn accelerates climate change. On a general note, the poor countries of the South have made little contribution to the environmental degradation when compared to the developed and highly industrialized global North. However, the impact of environmental degradation and multidimensional. The bigger question is in global environmental politics is who are supposed to take the responsibility for climate change? Who will be setting the standards for controlling an emission of the greenhouse gases? And how can the necessary action be implemented to protect and control the environment? So now I am just putting the agenda of this North South environmental global politics. So the second part of this last is understanding North South debate of global environmental politics. So the North South divide, signifying the differences between the more industrialized economies of the global North and the relatively less developed and developing countries of the global south has continued to be a defining feature in global environmental politics. The former, mostly the West. When I say the West, it means North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. These are basically the developed countries and which technically should come under the category of the West or the North. Considering the geographical location, developing countries global south are primarily located in the subtropical or the tropical ecosystem and the developing countries. The global north occupy mainly the temperate and the arctic climatic and ecosystem zones. The division between the north and the south is based on the economies, political stability, technology, scientific research, and other factors which are very important. So the geography, political, and economic factors and environmental politics and climate change has become the more significant issue debate between the two, north and the south. I will also talking about the Kyoto Protocol and all these things in my debate in later part. So the Kyoto Protocol of 1997 reinforced the clear division between the developing countries, that is Annexure 1, and the non-developing countries, that is Annexure 2. Inequality, justice have been the central issues of the major environmental conferences since Stockholm 1972. All these conferences are particularly in the Kyoto Protocol, which I will be talking about in more details, is recognized that the developing countries are mainly liable for the present high level of emissions of chlorofluorocarbons and GHS and emissions for the last 150 years of industrial activity. So mostly the industrial revolution and the industrial activity which took place in the last 150 years have been done mostly by the north and the developed countries. Thus, the debate between North and the South regarding the environmental politics should become prominent, intensified, and still prevailing at present also. So, moving away from the North and South debate, now let's come to the simple rich and poor divide. So, this North and South debate can also be understood from the rich, poor, and the rich debate. This North and South debate is more different. Ultimate goal is to seeking for global environmental politics. The northern view is that defining goal of enterprise and to improve the state of global environment. The southern view defines the central problem is uneven, unfair, and inappropriate state of global system, and particularly the north-south relations. So these two competing views reflect the different north and south perspective on global environmental politics and should be considered as the north-south debate. So in the 21st century, the words are still sharply polarized between the industrialized rich north and the less developed or impoverished south. The emergence of environmental scarcities is added to a new controversy of the long-standing debate of the structural relationship between the north and the south. So mostly you will see the south is having a lot of environmental uh, scarcities, and the north is basically having ample amount of abundance. So this debate also in the north south is what driving the entire global environmental politics of the 21st century. The countries of the south are becoming increasingly intolerant to the world order and wish to be as industrialized, as rich as the north. You see, the north has already become rich before the First World War and the Second World War. And the South, which was colonized mostly, most of the countries which were the colonies of the North, of basically the North or the West, for them, now they think that they should be developed and their standard of living should come up high as the North is. But that is where the politics starts. One can infer that the North South debate, which is grounded on economic divisions, has become a blame game over who is responsible for the emissions of these greenhouse gases and the minimizing of the problem rather than oriented towards positive action. So the problem of the North does not want to accept the responsibility of environmental destruction caused by their previous industrial activities. They don't want to take the responsibility that the that the problem they had caused for the last 150 years, they are not responsible for that anymore. But now they are putting pressure on the South that you should be responsible and how you are actually developing and what should be the standard of development and how the environment should be protected in this whole process of development. So, on the other hand, the stakeholders and leaders of the South are ignoring environmental concerns in many ways, and the main focus of the South is to industrialize and to develop. So, the key actors of the North South debate. So, I'll just talk about some of the key actors. So, the actors always inspire the increase of degree of freedom rather than to somewhat influence the advantage of the rules. The emission, basically, it is the emission of the greenhouse gases. Now the whole debate is now that how to cut the carbon fuels and then switch to electric vehicles. So this also is a great debate within the north and the south. So the risk of not having this all the same actors, and we have become seen that previous discussion, it is evident that the state actors are generally influenced by non-state actors such as international institutions and organizations in the debate of environmental protection and the related issues. Basically, they are using the non-state actors like organizations, like institutions to put pressure on the South to have a sustainable kind of development, which is actually not possible at this present uh, stage of development or we can say technology which the South has. So, in many of the conferences, the North-South debate has always come up, and they are using this as a tool in order to pin down the South because the North has already achieved what they want to achieve. It is basically the South, the developed and the developing countries. They want to achieve a high standard of living by going in for more industrialization and more development. So now let's come to another issue in this international climate negotiations and the North-South debate. So this whole concept in the 60s and 70s, many of these North-South tension is regarded as an environmental politics began at the United Nations Conference of Human Environment in the Stockholm in 1972. So this whole concept of North-South became obvious in the Stockholm Conference of Environment in 1972. Some classic divides started when Russia boycotted many of the US demands regarding environmental protection, such as banning the whaling system, serious endangered species, restriction on industrialization, and prohibition of nuclear weapon testing. So those days, in the Cold War days also, Russia did not accept these some of the American demands. So the North environmental agenda appears to be an intervention and domination over the third world economic development. Basically, that was the point. The point was that they wanted to dominate the third world economic agenda and not allow the third world economic agenda to be successful. That is what the issue is, basically in the North-South debate. And then they came to the policy that is called the tropical forest as a heritage of mankind. So obviously, the tropical forest, if you declare as a heritage of mankind, then the problem starts. Then the problem was reflected in the Rio Summit or the Earth Summit in 1992, when the protection of the tropical forest agenda was rejected by many countries who were part of the tropical forest, like Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, and all these people, all these countries coming in the evergreen tropical rainforest regions. So then from the Rio Summit, we went to the Kyoto Protocol of 1997. So the Kyoto Protocol gave all the states reduction of 8 to 10% reduction of the chlorofluorocarbon and other issues. So this is basically was done in order to achieve some targets, in order to have a better clean environment. So then from United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Copenhagen 2009, where it was suggested that keeping in view the global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, the success of the policy depends upon the state's implementation, but the effectiveness of the law remains the same and unclear and unanswered. So how to do development so that the temperature of the earth doesn't go beyond 1.5 to 2 degrees? That was the big challenge in the conference, Copenhagen conference in 2009. So again, the problem started with the developing South. The third one concerned with environmental damage, including ozone layer depletion, deforestation, emission of toxic waste, scarcity, drinking water, and many others practical issues. So the vulnerable to the environmental damage while contributing less to causation and degradation. The South, while urged to meet development objectives, pointed out that development countries, in the light of higher level of consumption, are responsible for most of the environmental damage. You see, the consumption pattern of the North is creating more damage than the development pattern of the South. The issue is this. But the North is not able to make any compromise in their consumption or their lifestyle. But they are putting pressure on the South that you cannot develop, and once you and the technology which the South has is basically crude technology. But they are not willing to give, the North is also not willing to give us the better technology so that we can do the development by using better technology and there is less pollution. So this is the debate which has been going on for the last 30 years in the time of globalization. Another issue is basically the blame game. Is basically the North is blaming the South for the last 3 decades and forcing each other to take up the atmospheric cleanup. No consensus has yet been reached in which countries should take the lead in reduction of the carbon dioxide gas emissions. All countries, developed and developing, have contributed more or less to the present climate situations. Developed countries have continued to accelerate in the past history, and developed countries have joined the group and also contributed more to environmental devastations. Thus, both parties should take their own responsibility in protecting the environment through mutual cooperation rather than blaming each other. So, this blame game thing has started, especially in the globalized era, post 90s. So, in the developing world, only two people ride a car, and yet they want to give up their riding of a bus. Brazil's chancellor, you see, the point is that uh, the North doesn't want to make any compromise in their lifestyle, but they want that all the compromise has to be made from the South. So this is the great environmental politics which has come up in the last 30 years, especially in the globalized area. So now let's come to the conclusion of my lecture. So in conclusion, it can be said that even today, the North-South divide are the core global environmental politics. Countries that are more resilient to the effects of environmental degradation are apparently not ready to take responsibility for carbon emissions. As a result, the North-South debate prevails on the grounds of unanswered questions that who should bear the responsibility of environmental damage. Though the two blocs are blaming each other, both parties are affecting the environment. Therefore, they should establish a globally accepted consensus of free environmental from this blame game and move towards sustainable development and peace building. It is true that the North and the South are responsible for climate degradation, although based on past and present emissions and actions, the responsibility of the North are comparably greater than the South. The question is how to minimize the controversy. At this juncture, it is important that the policies to tackle climate change equitable based on contribution. The question is accountability of a higher importance. The North-South debate on the global environmental politics can be minimized through accountability regarding emissions, as well as establishing active global reductions in all countries, North and South. So the developing countries should use environmental friendly technology in their industries, formulating mutual cooperation for achieving these global standards. So who is going to give us the technology to the South? Because you see, the technology which the North has actually produced is very costly technology. They want to make profit out of it. They don't, and the South cannot buy the technology of the North and then adopt it for their own, because it will become extremely costly. Let us take the case of this hybrid cars, electric cars, and this hydrogen cars. So at present, the cost of a car in India and South Asia, or for that matter, globally, all the developing countries, it starts from 5 lakhs to 10, 15 lakhs. But a hybrid car will cost to 35 to 40 lakhs. So this difference of 15 lakhs or 30, 20 lakhs, who is the poorer people of the South cannot give a 35, 40 lakhs spent for a car. So that is the big challenge. Who is going to give this subsidy so that the car can be sold at 5 to 10 lakhs? So that is the challenge of the present global order and environmental politics. So I will end by saying that beyond this, the North should be generously supporting relevant efforts by South, and the South in turn should be aware of their duties and maintain boundaries of emissions. Market-based mechanisms should offer an ever approach to resolving the debate where the emitters are bound by specific emissions levels and to pay the compensation where the emissions cross judicial boundaries. Such payment should be cross-emission based, such that the compensation will increase and the emission rates. At the end, human beings, our survival is now at great risk because climate change, and it's time to cooperate and ensure healthy world for the future generations. So thank you. Now I open the year for question answers. This is basically what I wanted to submit in front of you about these three aspects: environmental security, environmental peace building, and the North-South debate in the politics of environment.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So now the session is open for the questions or queries. If you have any question or query, you can any of you can unmute yourself and ask question, or you can also drop a question in the chat box. Yes, Megha.
Good evening, sir. First of all, thank you so much, sir, for a wonderful explanation over the environmental concerns. Sir, my question is from your third part of the dialogue. Sir, recently we have seen that in the international conventions on environments, there is a major discussion about the net carbon zero emissions. So, sir, I want to ask you that this net zero carbon emission, that is whatever the carbon will be produced in the nature shall be utilized completely. So, how much it appears practical? So, what is
Yeah,
your opinion?
now I understand your question. You see, these are all tactics. Basically, our prime minister said that we will become net zero by 2070. China is also telling by 2070. So the issue is that at present, with the amount of technology which we have and the rate of industrial and economic growth, to have a net or a carbon neutral or net zero emission is a very, very far dream. So that is the reason why they have actually said or has postponed it to 2070. So another 40 years they will develop, and whatever may be the emission and whatever may be the year, that should be, I do not think that it can be reduced to 8 to 10%. And the temperature, I have a feeling, you see, the average global temperature in the last 5 to 7 years have increased. There are more warm days in a year than it was 20 years. So this is the challenge. So the challenge is that the West is not willing to give us the technology, and they want money for it, and the South is not willing to take that technology because we don't have that much of money to give to the North in order to use that technology. So that is the reason why some of our leaders, especially India, China, you see, India, China are the global power engines of the world. If they grow at 10%, both countries, India and China, then the world will be a much better place, because most of the manufacturing and other sectors will be from these two countries in the future. And with this technology which we have in India and China, it is impossible to maintain a net zero emission in the future. I hope I made some sense to your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Any other question?
Yes, Seema is also there, sir. Seema.
Okay.
गुड इवनिंग सर। सर मेरा क्वेश्चन आपके आंसर्स के हिसाब में जो भी आंसर दिया तो सर उसमें आपने एक बात कही कि कंट्रीज डेवलपिंग कंट्री को 40 इयर्स या आगे 50 ईयर का सेट कर रही है कि आफ्टर 50 ईयर और आफ्टर 40 ईयर हम नेट जीरो कर देंगे, बट क्या सर तब तक ऐसी कंडीशन रहेगी? क्योंकि क्लाइमेट चेंज इतनी तेजी से हो रहा है, जिस तेजी से, और टेम्परेचर जिस लेवल से इंक्रीज कर रहा है, क्या वो काफी लेट नहीं हो जाएगा हमें कोई एक्शन लेने के लिए?
ये द इशू इज दिस बिकॉज यू सी हम लोग क्या कॉम्प्रोमाइज कर सकते हैं बिकॉज द पॉपुलेशन विच वी हैव, द डिमांड फॉर जॉब्स विच इज देयर, द ग्रोथ इन विच वी शुड हैव टू हैव a minimum standard of living. You see, ये सब चीजों को भी ध्यान में रखते हुए हम लोग ये सोच रहे हैं कि 40 साल तक हम लोग ये नॉर्मलाइज हो जाएंगे या न्यूट्रलाइज हो जाएंगे, और 40 साल के अंदर धीरे धीरे करके देखिए द मेन थिंग इज दैट टू रिड्यूस ऑन द oil based technology, oil based resources, how to shift from carbon oil to electricity or to solar or to hydrogen or to other resources. अगर अगले 10 15 20 साल में मेजर ब्रेक थ्रू होता है हाइड्रोजन, बिकॉज हाइड्रोजन देखिए इज अ मोर क्लीन एनर्जी देन बैटरी ऑपरेटेड व्हीकल्स. आप देखे होंगे कल गडकरी जी ने एक हाइड्रोजन कार में पार्लियामेंट आए, और हाइड्रोजन बेसिकली कोई पोल्यूशन नहीं देता है, वो क्लीन वाटर निकलता है एग्जॉस्ट से. So the clean water which comes from the exhaust, that is the best form of energy that can be used in the future. But the point is that how far it will be cost effective. आम आदमी को हाइड्रोजन में क्या बस चल सकते हैं, क्या हाइड्रोजन में ट्रेन चल सकते हैं, बुलेट ट्रेन चल सकते हैं, एविएशन या एरोप्लेन चल सकते हैं, या कार या मोटरसाइकिल चल सकते हैं. इसका टेक्नोलॉजी का ब्रेक थ्रू अभी भी है, but there is lot of lobby from the oil lobby that they don't allow this hydrogen technology to come to the forefront. But I think the time has come, और अगले 10 15 साल में ये हाइड्रोजन टेक्नोलॉजी जो है ये रिप्लेस करेगा ऑयल टेक्नोलॉजी को, और धीरे धीरे हम लोग जितना कम ऑयल के ऊपर निर्भर रहेंगे, पेट्रोल एंड डीजल एंड गैसोलीन, उतना ही बेटर है फॉर द एनवायरमेंटल इशू. और धीरे धीरे करके इट विल बी ए मोर बेटर एंड ए क्लीनर अर्थ व्हेन वी यूज द हाइड्रोजन टेक्नोलॉजी.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, sir, there are two more queries. One is from Swetanshu Jha.
Uh,
Swetanshu Jha, kindly unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Thank you for this informative speech. So my question is that we see the Western countries setting a target for getting carbon neutral. So,
yeah.
sir, is it really practically possible for them to get carbon neutral by 2050 or 2060? Because as we see that the European nations, most of them are highly dependent on natural gases for their purposes getting served, and the US, which is now again getting on the road of producing crude oil and that industrialization processes. So, is it
Yeah,
possible for
yeah. You
them to?
see, first, let us understand what is this carbon neutral. Carbon neutral means the amount of emission will be neutralized by the amount of trees or the greenery which you have. So they are pumping lot of money to have green cover. कार्बन न्यूट्रल कंट्रीज अभी जो हैं, दो कंट्रीज हैं, एक कोस्टारिका है और एक न्यूजीलैंड. देखिए कोस्टारिका का पॉपुलेशन 40 लाख है, न्यूजीलैंड का पॉपुलेशन उसके आसपास उतना ही है, and their consumption pattern is completely different from the American and the Western. For the West to become carbon neutral in the future, because they don't want to compromise on their lifestyle. देखिए एक अमेरिकन एक साल में जितना रिसोर्सेज यूज करता है या कंज्यूम करता है, दैट इज इक्वल टू 35,000 नेपालीज सिटीजन. 35,000 नेपाली सिटीजन एक साल में जितना रिसोर्स और एनर्जी यूज करते हैं, एक अमेरिकन उतना यूज करता है. दिस इज द कंपैरिजन. Are the West or the North willing to do any compromise in their lifestyle? That is the challenge. The challenge is that West population वहां कम है, लेकिन उनका जो लाइफस्टाइल है वो इतना हाई है, वो इतना ज्यादा है कि the amount of energy they are using is completely out of control. And especially oil is still today a very cheap resource. आज भी अगर भारत में ऑयल के ऊपर सब टैक्स खत्म हो जाएंगे और ऑयल कंपनीज अपना प्रॉफिट रख के 45 रुपया में 1 लीटर पेट्रोल बिक सकता है। नाउ इट इज 105-107 रुपीज। तो बाकी जितना जो टैक्स है वो आपका टैक्स ही है, एजुकेशन सेस है, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर सेस है, बाकी सब टैक्स है। सो मान के चलिए, देखिए ऑयल अभी भी काफी सस्ता है ग्लोबली। हम लोग का देश में ऑयल सबसे ज्यादा कॉस्टली है, पाकिस्तान में ऑयल सस्ता है, बांग्लादेश में हमसे सस्ता है, श्रीलंका में अभी इशू प्रॉब्लम है, बट द ऑयल इज बिकॉज देयर टैक्स सिस्टम इज वेच मच लेस देन आवर टैक्स सिस्टम, एंड ऑयल टुडे इज स्टिल अ वेरी चीप सोर्स ऑफ एनर्जी। सो एंड द ऑयल लॉबी, देखिए दुनिया में एक ऑयल लॉबी है जो वो नहीं चाहता है कि कोई प्रकार का अल्टरनेटिव सोर्स ऑफ एनर्जी आए, लाइक हाइड्रोजन और लाइक इलेक्ट्रिक कार बैटरीज or any other source. So till that is not broken by the oil lobbies, you see the oil lobbies are controlled by very powerful and very few countries. That is the challenge. And still oil is very cheap. देखिए अभी ऑयल जानबूझ के हाई करके रखा जा रहा है, क्योंकि 2 साल का जो कोविड हुआ, जितने भी ऑयल प्रोड्यूसिंग कंट्रीज थे उनका इनपुट कॉस्ट इतना ज्यादा हो गया, क्योंकि ऑयल का जो मशीनरी है, जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, और ऑयल 2 1.5 साल 2 साल कंजप्शन इतना कम हो गया कि उनका उनका जो मेंटेनेंस कॉस्ट था वो ज्यादा हो गया, बिकॉज कोई बिका नहीं। तो दे वांट टू मेक दिस प्रॉफिट out of this whatever this war or post
Right,
covid.
right.
Yeah, so that is what is basically happening, but still oil is a very cheap source of energy. आपका जो कहना ठीक है कि ये प्रॉब्लम तो रहेगा, एंड अल्टरनेट सोर्स द टेक्नोलॉजी जो है वो वेस्ट के पास है, but they are still not actually, because they will charge something and make the profit initially, and then they will give you the technology. या हेल्थ इशू तो बहुत बड़ा इशू है। ग्लोबल हेल्थ बिकॉज ऑफ पोल्यूशन इज वन ऑफ द बिगेस्ट कंसर्न। और आप कितना पैसा अपने हेल्थ पे खर्च करते हैं, स्पेशली कोविड और पोस्ट कोविड सिचुएशन में। देखिए सबसे ज्यादा जो प्रॉफिट हुआ है कोविड में वो हेल्थ सेक्टर में हुआ है। The pharmaceutical industry and the health industry and the health concerning people have become trillionaires. इतना प्रॉफिट हुआ है इस पोस्ट कोविड एंड पोस्ट कोविड समय में। अभी भी पता नहीं है कि पोस्ट कोविड में क्या क्या और नया बीमारी और नया प्रकार का हेल्थ इश्यूज आने वाले, because the covid has just come to an end. We do not know whether it is right or wrong, but आपका लॉन्ग टर्म हेल्थ इश्यूज आएंगे और आप ज्यादा पैसा हेल्थ पे खर्च करेंगे, because whenever you start spending on a particular sector, that sector grows, and this is what is happening in the global issue today. Yeah, health is another issue because of pollution and this COVID-19. Any more questions?
Yeah, Shruti Jha.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening to all of you. Good evening, respected sir. Good evening,
Yeah,
respected teachers. So my doubt is related to forest fires.
yeah.
Like basically, it creates like emissions, carbon monoxide, that is very injurious to our health. It creates fumes. It is very detrimental. So how
Sure.
should we control over it? Like like we like. For cultivation process, झुमिंग cultivation, let's take an example of झुमिंग cultivation. बहुत सारे पत्ते को हम जला देते हैं, बहुत इकट्ठा ही जला देते हैं, and then we burn it, right? And then कभी कभार फायर इतनी ज्यादा लग जाती है कि वो
It is out of
like
control हो जाता है, yeah.
हाँ, तो how should we control over it? So
You see,
that's my
forest fire is another issue because of global warming. You see, the temperature now, 20 days back, it was very pleasant and it was nearly spring and all. But in a matter of 15 days, the temperature has gone up to 40. So this violent change of temperature in a short period of time is creating so much of problem. You see, the problem for the last few years in Australia. Australia has been seeing a lot of forest fires. And अभी ऑस्ट्रेलिया में फ्लड्स आ गए हैं. You will see forest fires in many of the countries like in USA and in Europe. इंडिया में फॉरेस्ट फायर है, लेकिन देहरादून में और बाकी पहाड़ी ये में है. बट फॉरेस्ट फायर जो है ये बिकॉज ऑफ द ग्लोबल वार्मिंग एंड हाई टेम्परेचर्स के कारण पेड़ को पेड़ ऐसे घिस के वो फायर अपने आप क्रिएट हो जाते हैं. or we should have the mechanism wherever the fire breaks out. You see, हम लोग के पास NDRF है and बाकी सब mechanism है. वो फायर होते ही हम लोग तुरंत उसको बुझा जाना. Then only it will not spread. But in a country like India, which is poor, how much money we can spend on NDRF and to control the fire? So that is another issue. You see, who is going to spend the money? The government. It's obviously the government. Private लोग तो कभी spend नहीं करेंगे ये सब चीज करने के लिए. So the government, but we have the mechanism, and we can stop. And the NDRF and other agencies, the forest agencies are there. But whenever there is a forest fire, which should be immediately taken into account and not allowed to grow in size. Once it grows in size, when it has a impact, negative impact on the flora and fauna and the animals and the air in large. आपको पराली जो जलाते हैं basically after the cutting of the rice in the month of November, Diwali के time में, that is one of the greatest pollution in the entire north region. बनारस तक उसका असर आता है. For the last 2-3 years we have seen. So that there should be some other mechanisms developed so that we can stop this burning. And it is very cheap way to just आग लगा देंगे, फिर जब जल जाएगा, फिर जल वो उपजाऊ हो जाएगा, वो जमीन के आ जाएगा, फिर अगला क्रॉप फिर प्लांट होगा. तो ये बहुत इजी और बहुत सस्ता मेथड है. कुछ पैसा उसमें खर्च नहीं होता है, लेकिन इट हैज ए मैसिव इम्पैक्ट ऑन द एनवायरमेंट. एंड एनवायरमेंट होते होते वो हेल्थ के ऊपर भी, ह्यूमन हेल्थ के ऊपर भी उसका असर पड़ जाता है. So in the long run, there has to be some mechanism developed so that this has to be stopped, and some other mechanism should be developed so that we don't have this forest fires and burning of these crops.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any more
You're
questions?
muted. Dr. Pathak, you're muted.
Punita, unmute yourself.
Okay, yes, sir. Okay, sir. Sorry, sir. There is a question in the chat box, sir.
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There is a question asked by Sahana Idrisi that China's experimental advanced superconducting tokamak East, also known as the Chinese artificial sun, has operated since 2006, and it 5 times more hotter than real thing. Is it possible that someday we can rely on such energy, and will India be able to afford it in the coming years?
You see, this has been there in the debate, and many scientists don't believe it, what the Chinese are doing. You see, the Chinese don't have any kind of mechanism to say and to bring the global scientists to show that what they are doing is actually, there is something out. They just give you some data and just tell you that we are doing this. So whether they have created an artificial sun so that it will be a source of energy in the future, that is a highly debatable and a highly not a very confirmed case of in the global standards. That is one thing. You see, the problem is with the Chinese or with these kind of experiments is that we are trying to artificially interfere into the process of creating some kind of energy which is other than the natural source of energy. So that is the challenge. Some countries, and especially China, has been trying to do this, but I don't think so in the future it is going to be of any help unless we don't have this kind of sustainable development and resourceful development, which will actually look into affect the demand for global energy and how it can be suitably substituted by other than the oil and the other source of energy which is highly polluting in nature. That should be the lookout, rather than creating this hyperbole of a artificial sun which they have. Because you see, to create an artificial sun you need energy. It is not something not natural. The sun is a natural thing, but to create an artificial thing is that you have to put in energy first to create it, something like that. And I don't think so it is going to be sustainable in the future.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, there are 2 more questions. I think it is hand raised by Anu and Ritika. Ritika?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Sir, जिस तरह से fertilizers और यूज किए जा रहे हैं, जो सॉइल डिग्रेड हो रहा है, क्वालिटी डिग्रेड हो रही है, उस पे सर उतना फोकस नहीं हो रहा है। गवर्नमेंट और किसान के बीच भी सर कोई कम्युनिकेशन प्रॉपर नहीं हो रहा है। तो सर उसके रिगार्डिंग जो अवेयरनेस होनी चाहिए उस पे, और
वो
ऑल्सो
उसको
इन रिगार्ड विद एग्रीकल्चरल बिल्स सर, जैसे कोई प्रॉपर नहीं बैठा था।
या ये ठीक है, आप ठीक कह रहे हैं। देखिए, पॉइंट इज दैट कि देयर इज अ डिमांड फ्रॉम द पॉपुलेशन फॉर इंक्रीज इन द प्रोडक्टिविटी, और जितने आप आर्टिफिशियल फॉस्फोरस और नाइट्रेट और जितने भी खाद यूज करेंगे, दीज आर आर्टिफिशियल इन नेचर, एंड देयर इज अ सस्टेनेबिलिटी ऑफ द सॉइल ऑल्सो। तो सॉइल का एक मैक्सिमम कैपेसिटी है कि कितना यील्ड या कितना प्रोड्यूस आपको दे सकता है। जितना भी खाद ज्यादा डालेंगे, इसका मतलब नहीं है कि बहुत ज्यादा आपको उपजाऊ मिल जाएगा। So now the government is now thinking of having this organic plantation and organic use of fertilizers. हम लोग जो पुराने जमाने में जो फर्टिलाइजर यूज होता था, गोबर एंड अदर थिंग्स, इसके ऊपर ज्यादा ध्यान देना चाहिए गवर्नमेंट को। एंड आर्टिफिशियल फर्टिलाइजर जो है, जो जो इंडस्ट्रियल यूज होता है, उसको थोड़ा कम करके कैसे आप उसको अल्टरनेट मॉडल बना सकते हैं, दैट शुड बी द फोकस एंड द ये ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट। And the government should provide some kind of resources and some kind of alternative use of this fertilizer, so that in the long run the soil quality, the soil fertility stays, and the groundwater is less polluted, because the more fertilizers you use, the groundwater is polluted. So then you have to use again filters, and then you have to purify the water for drinking and other things. So that becomes a very, very costly affair. So I think the government should now focus, and the government is focusing on the use of less fertilizers and less organic use of fertilizers.
Anu, do you have any question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to first thank the whole team of Vasanta College and our sir, Manoj sir, to explain this topic in such very simple words. So, sir, I want to ask the question that this discussed topic is very much relevant, and mostly of us are student of masters, and I want to ask you, sir, that can we see some scope in this field? Like,
Yeah,
if
lot of PhD topics are there in this to be explored in this field. You can pursue your PhD in North-South debate, in environmental security, environmental conflict, environmental peace building. So these are some of the unexplored chapters or unexplored subjects in Indian context. ये basically एक North का concept है, भारत में अभी आ रहा है, and you can explore and do PhD in your higher studies in these concepts. That is more important. You can join a
uh,
PhD program in our Malviya Center of Peace Research and pursue a topic from these.
thank you so much, sir. Sir, can you take some more names or give some more names?
जामिया मिलिया में है, सिक्किम यूनिवर्सिटी में है, और बाकी जितने भी सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटी जेएनयू में है, दे ऑल परस्यू एनवायरमेंटल इश्यूज एज पीएचडी टॉपिक्स, एनवायरमेंटल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, एनवायरमेंटल पीस बिल्डिंग, एनवायरमेंटल सिक्योरिटी, नॉर्थ साउथ डिबेट इन एनवायरमेंट, एनवायरमेंटल पॉलिटिक्स, ऑल दीज थिंग्स, एंड ग्लोबल वार्मिंग एंड क्लाइमेट चेंज, ये सब इश्यूज टॉपिक्स पे आप पीएचडी कर सकते
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Hoping to get guidance from you in near
हैं.
future.
Okay, please do.
Sir, sir, there is a question in the chat box asked by Anamika Gupta, MA student, MA final year student. She asks that, isn't bandwagoning the developmental stance of the West a mistake on developing world's part?
Yeah, obviously the model which the West had is very much exploitative in nature. They exploited the environment in order to develop in the last 150 years. And lot of pollution, air, water, underground, sea, out of space, all these pollutions took place in the last 150 years, the way the West developed. You see, I was talking about it, the Earth has a capacity, sink capacity. How much the pollution which produced by human beings can be neutralized by the Earth's own mechanism. You see, that mechanism is limited in nature. If you go beyond the capacity of that mechanism, then the pollution takes over. So the West model, and actually we followed the West model without thinking about it, because the alternative models, especially of South Asia, Southeast Asia, India, African, Latin American models, are much more sustainable in the future and much more less polluting in nature and good for the planet Earth. That model was actually not taken into account, and we should fall back to these models, which is alternative models of growth and development.
Thank you, sir. So is there any other? Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
Shruti Jha कुछ बोल रहे हैं masters. Yeah.
Yeah,
You can apply for PhD in September. We are coming with 2-3 PhD seats. Both if you qualify NET and JRF, then you can directly apply in a center for this PhD program.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, Shruti, again, you want to ask something?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, basically, this is first of all, thanks, my gratitude to all of you, and I'm very obliged. I'm from Vasant Kanya Mahavidyalaya.
Yeah.
I'm pursuing my master's from there.
Yeah.
I'm actually like totally into like peace thing. Like
Okay.
I believe in peace.
Yeah.
So in varieties of peace thing. So
Okay.
I wanted to work in this department, like peace, like.
So
But I want.
you can come and meet me personally in the Malviya Center of Peace Research in the Faculty of Social Science, so that I can explain you much better, and my colleagues are there, so that we can give you a better idea how to pursue higher studies and PhD in our
Okay,
center.
sir.
Yes,
Okay,
Shruti.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the didactic and enlightening session. It was a thorough and clear approach for the topic, especially some of the very important things which you covered, such as concept of environmental security, the anthropogenic view, threat without an enemy, environmental peace negotiation, and you have thoroughly discussed the north-south divide on the environmental politics. So thank you so much, sir, and thank you that you have answered so many queries or questions were there, and you have answered so patiently. So thank you so much, sir. Now moving forward, now for the formal vote of thanks, I would like to invite Dr. Rakesh Mishra, sir, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, DAV PG College. Sir.
Thank you, madam. Behalf of Department of Political Science, DAV PG College, and Department of Political Science, Vasanta College for Women, Rajghat, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Manoj Mishra ji. I must say that it was a very knowledgeable and very insightful lecture, and I'm sure that our student and faculty members benefited a lot from this lecture. I thank to Dr. Satyadev Singh, Principal DAVPG College, and Dr. Alka Singh, Principal Vasanta College, for their support and their guidance. And I also thank to all faculty members and students for their active participation in this lecture. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Okay, thank you. I will send you some reading material on the topic to the